should be here.
Casey should be here. Yeah, I think Casey's coming, and then I think JR is too. So I
Okay.
think we'll have 4.
Okay, maybe they're joining us online.
Yeah, we actually can't vote on the minutes either, so.
Yeah.
we'll-
We might move right through the
Yeah,
agenda.
yeah, like we could be moving through this meeting quickly.
Can we call back one of our items we were gonna move
Yeah.
because of time?
Right.
Okay, well,
So,
get started, even though we have a couple commissioners present. Did we have any public comment?
no one's signed up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess we'll go to city foresters report then. If we're, or do we want to maybe wait a minute or two? What do you think?
I know Casey's coming. He said he
Yeah.
was, and I just emailed with JR this morning about something else. So
Okay.
I feel like
Good.
they'll be here.
We have that 5 minutes with the public comment set aside, so.
Yeah.
wait for them.
Yeah, I mean, we
There's
just
a
kind
bunch
of
of guests coming too. Are they all coming on Zoom?
they're all coming on Zoom. Yeah.
They're-
Oh, okay.
Oh,
great.
I thought Darely wasn't gonna make it. Okay.
Welcome, Darely. We're waiting for
Oh,
folks to
there's
come
Casey.
on. Oh, here's Casey.
Okay. Cool.
Hi, Casey.
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, if we get JR, we would have a quorum for the minutes at least. So, oh, there we go. Hey, look at that. We're gonna do it. Awesome.
Welcome, JR.
If there was time, I could see if Rebecca and Jesse are able to.
Well, we need 6 for a heritage tree.
Oh, okay. So you'll need
That's the
four
thing. It's in
for
the
It's a
that.
different
code.
quorum.
It's in
Gotcha.
code. We need 6. Yeah,
I
exactly. So close. So close. But we could vote on the meeting minutes before we go to your report, since we've got everyone here.
All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any public comment today, so we could move to meeting minutes from, we have 2 months, right?
Yeah, I think we had July and August. So
So any comments or corrections for the minutes? No?
Nothing for me.
Okay. I think we'll do them separately because I can't approve last month because I wasn't there, so, I move to approve July's meeting minutes.
Second. I second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Barely? Okay, is that, are we
yeah,
able to?
we're good.
Okay.
We're good on
Great.
that one.
All right,
Thanks,
moving
Dylan.
on to August. I move well, actually, someone else can approve these since I wasn't there.
Recording in progress.
A motion to approve the August meeting minutes?
Yeah, I move to I move to approve the August minutes.
Thanks, Casey. We have a Second from Bruce, all in favor?
Great.
Any opposed? And I abstain.
Thanks.
I'm sorry. I got my votes mixed up. I meant to abstain from August and approve July. I was here for July and not for August. I got them confused.
Thanks, Darely, for that.
I think we're still good.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right, well, I think we can move to city foresters report.
All right, I'm in the meeting, Brian, but I'm not visible. No, if that matters,
Oh.
but
That's okay. Yeah. Oh, I see you're in the attendees. I can
okay.
move you over.
Okay, thanks. Not sure that matters. All right, good morning, everybody. So As a reminder, I'm Casey Jogers. I'm the Urban Forestry Permitting and Regulation Manager, and I'm standing in for Jen today while she's out of the office. So for our update today, we have Arbor Day coming up. It is on October 12th at Glen Fair Park. It's a completely free event, family friendly, and to celebrate trees in East Portland. So we hope that everybody can come. There's going to be a tree planting event at 10 a.m. Followed by some art, games, and food. Food will be starting at noon. So that's the Arbor Day event, but there's a bunch of additional events and volunteer opportunities that are coming up just to sort of celebrate, I think, the month in general. So there's going to be a plant and a tree walk at Whitaker Ponds. That's on September 22nd at 2 p.m. And so we could put a link for registration in the chat there for everybody. We're also hosting a Find Your Flare event on September 20th and 21st at Mount Tabor Community Gardens, where volunteers can help to prepare young trees for tree planting as part of the yard tree giveaway program. People will learn how to properly prep the tree by locating the root flare and removing circling roots, but there's no experience necessary. Anybody can come and join us. Then we do have the yard tree giveaway itself on September 28th. This is a really big event for Forestry. There's going to be the first 1,000 trees under the, what's ETC?
Equitable Tree Canopy.
Equitable
That's
Tree
the
Canopy. Thank you.
Program.
So it's the first 1,000 trees under the Equitable Tree Canopy, part of the PSEF program that'll be planted through Urban Forestry's Yard Tree Giveaway Program. The additional funding from PSEF increased the program from 2,000 trees to 3,000 trees annually. And the PSEF funds are supporting grants to outreach partners working in priority neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods include Green Lents, Taking Ownership PDX. These are the organizations, not neighborhoods. Portland Delta's alumni chapter and the Centennial Community Association. And then a fourth event that we have is a tree walk at Roseway Parkway on October 12th at 9:30 a.m. And this is to learn more about the trees of Roseway Parkway with community members, Catherine Clark and Jim Gershbach. You're going to walk all 5 blocks of the parkway and discuss the tree diversity and the history of that parkway. So for Equitable Tree Canopy, I want to give a little bit of an update on that. The advisory group is going to hold their second meeting on September 30th. The meeting is going to focus on the first round of contracting under the program for planting in the 2025-2026 season. As a reminder, the goal of the Equitable Tree Canopy is to plant at least 15,000 trees over the next 5 years. And then for an update on our Portland Urban Forest Plan. Over the last month, the Portland Urban Forest Plan project team has continued to work on preparing canopy goals and recommended actions to achieve the plan's vision and goals. In October, the team's going to share draft canopy goals and actions with all 3 project advisory committees to hear their feedback before making any additional revisions and setting those canopy goals. A portion of this October 17th Urban Forestry Commission meeting, this meeting is going to be devoted to discussing these 2 elements of the plan. And then lastly, I'm going to pass it over to Brian to give us an update on the large tree amendment.
Yes, so we had originally planned on the large tree amendment going to council on October 2nd. That's been moved. It is now going to be November 13th. And we have a time certain date time of 4 o'clock for that. So a little bit later than we had planned, but still moving forward. And then I think I have one more thing I wanted to note on that. Oh, and just clarifying for those that may not remember that this is the amendment to remove the sunset clause from the large tree amendment in Title 11. So if the amendment is adopted by council, that would become a permanent part of the tree code. And the November 13th date is the first reading of the ordinance. That's when staff give a briefing, public comment is allowed, and then city council would vote on the following week, so November 20th. So public notices will go out and probably mid October as we get closer to that date.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Oh, Darrell, did you have a question?
Yes, and can you remind me, did you want the commissioners to show up for that to show support?
Yes, great question. So we typically so the Urban Forestry Commission and the Planning Commission are the advisory bodies on Title 11 amendments. Often a representative does attend to give that recommendation in person. I've talked to Megan, and Megan is interested in doing that, but I think we'd vote in October to actually appoint Megan to be the UFC's representative for that. And then I'm pretty sure the Planning Commission will have someone attend as well.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all that I had for the city forester update, unless there's any other questions.
I have a question about the changing the date. Was that the auditor, city commissioner, parks?
Mayor's office, the mayor's office responsible for the council agenda, and so they were the ones that moved it back. And the October 2nd was always that was our requested date. It was never like a confirmed date, so it was always kind of up in the air when it would be actually there. So it sounds like there's just a lot on the agenda for the next, month and a half or so.
So this will be after the election.
It would be, yes.
Clearly, anyone who's running for office would not have to make any public statement prior to the election.
That's correct.
I hadn't thought of it like that.
Okay. Well, we're a little ahead of
Yeah, we're
schedule.
well ahead. So if there's any questions,
Yeah.
kill a little time if anyone's got anything they want to talk about.
Where is Glenfair Park?
There.
Um,
Sure, I can look it up though.
Yeah, it's in East Portland. I'm not sure exactly where though.
Let's see.
Oh, by the golf course.
That's right, yeah. Mhm.
Where's
It's like just north of Burnside and east of 151st. So close to the golf course there.
is that a relatively new park?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It says, the location says northeast 154th Avenue and Cooch Court.
And there's a school right next to it.
Right, well, Nick is here, so we could move ahead of schedule to the Bill NATO Award. Hey, Nick.
Hey there, just getting my camera situated here, all of my screens.
Surprise, you're on early.
Hey, all right, how much time do we have for this agenda item?
Well, we had it all the way till 10:20, but you don't have to feel pressure to use all that time if you don't need to.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for having me early. Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Desai. I'm the supervisor of Urban Forestry's Community Stewardship Work Group. My team is responsible for education, engagement, community partnerships, and promotion of our urban forestry programming. One of the programs that we run is our annual Arbor Day celebration, which is coming up October 12th at Glenfair Park. Heard you talking about that. I'm glad the buzz is out there. At that event, we present the NATO Community Trees Award. And I'm here today to talk you through the process or present to you some information about the process for selecting a NATO Community Tree Awardee. I'll provide a brief background on the award, the eligibility criteria, and introduce the 4 nominees and provide time for discussion and voting. So I think we'd originally planned 15 minutes. We can try to stick to that. And let me share my screen so we can get started. bear with me as I get us situated here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Great, okay. Perfect. And I'm sorry for the technical difficulties here. The screen is not advancing for me. Good thing we got an early start on this.
Yeah, plenty of time.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, folks. Very sorry. Hold on a second.
While you're doing that, Bill NATO founded the Street Tree Advisory Committee in the mid-70s. The Urban Forestry Commission did not come into effect until the 80s, and that was a discussion where there was a belief that commission would have more authority than an advisory committee. So, but Bill NATO was involved for a very long time.
It's cool.
Brian, I just need a couple minutes here. I'm having some technical difficulties.
Do you want me to share? I know you sent me the presentation. I could share my screen.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, let's do
Yeah, let me
that.
see if I can pull that up.
Okay.
Want me to talk about upcoming agendas at all?
I think I got it here. Right. Us. All right.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so back on track. So just a little history. Next slide, please. The Bill NATO Community Trees Award honors Bill NATO, a businessman, civic leader, and philanthropist who founded the Urban Forestry Commission in 1974. But Bruce, thanks for that correction there. This is some information that we have previously presented as part of this award, but I think there's some nuance to that. But he was a part of the UFC from the very beginning and did serve as chair until his passing. Portland was a different place back then. Things were a lot smaller and things happened a lot differently. Now we have different chair terms. Mr. NATO inspired individuals to recognize the numerous benefits that trees bring to our city. And it was through his humor, persistence, and imaginative approach that he inspired people to recognize the benefits and services and importance of trees, especially urban trees. Next slide, please. Portland's Urban Forestry Commission created the Bill NATO Community Trees Award in 1997, a year after his death, to honor the stories of individuals, organizations, or projects that have continued Mr. NATO's work and reflect his dedication to Portland and our urban forest. Nominees are recognized for their remarkable efforts in tree planting, preservation, or stewardship while increasing people's awareness about the importance of trees. Each year, Urban Forestry collects nominations for the individual award and the group award in the months leading up to Arbor Day. Nominations are compiled by Urban Forestry staff and presented to the UFC for consideration. The Urban Forestry Commission votes to recognize one individual award and one group award if nominations in both categories are received. And awards are presented at Portland's annual Arbor Day celebration. As you can see here again, the celebration October 12th at Glenfair Park. And you're all invited. Next slide, please. To be eligible for this award, Individuals, groups, or projects may be nominated for their volunteer-based efforts in support of our urban forest. Work must occur within the city of Portland and contribute to the betterment of our urban forest and inspire others to recognize the beauty and importance of our city's trees. It is up to the Urban Forestry Commission to select the awardee, and nominations are reviewed for their degree of community-wide impact and the quality, innovation, and degree to which their work serves as an example for others to follow in the spirit of Mr. Nato's work. Next slide, please. Past awardees have recognized the possibilities for trees in our neighborhoods and have acted to instill the value of trees in our communities. Connecting Canopies Coalition, pictured here, won the award last year for promoting environmental justice and diversity in the green workforce through their youth career development program, which worked closely with urban forestry programs in the city. Ginger Edwards founded the Arbor Lodge Tree Team, a group of volunteers working to plant, preserve, and promote trees in their neighborhood and beyond. The No Ivy League has worked to empower youth, educate the public, and remove English ivy from Portland's parks. Kina Rubin is a founder of Trees for Life Oregon, a volunteer organization that advocates for large, long-lived trees and space for them in every part of the city. And Wisdom of the Elders created a workforce development internship program, providing a paid internship experience for Native American community members to learn job skills critical for work in the environmental sector. And they've partnered with Portland Parks and Rec to learn habitat restoration, tree planting and care, and more. So this gives you a little window into how past awardees have brought diverse experiences, and the award is recognized a multitude of different types of efforts. As mentioned, the award dates back to 1997, so we have a long list of awardees who have been selected by the UFC, and we are looking for you to carry forth the tradition today. And the next slide, please. So, let's see. This year, you'll be voting for one recipient of the individual award. There were no nominations for the Group NATO Award this year, and that happens sometimes. But we did receive 4 nominations for the individual award, and the 4 nominees for your consideration are Linda Eshragi, who's a pioneer, philanthropist, and business owner. Through her horticultural expertise over the past 30 years, people now associate Japanese maples with Oregon, and this is an excerpt from the nomination that was submitted for her. Lindsay Oldani is a local advocate for tree and garden education. She has transformed her own yard into a habitat and canopy role model for the entire neighborhood. Ed Washington is a local civil rights hero and champion for our urban forest. Ed served as Urban Forestry Commission Chair from 1998 till 2006. And Garth Massey is an avid tree advocate and community volunteer. For the past 15 years, he has volunteered his time and energy to maintain trees and support an ecologically healthy landscape at the Hoyt Arboretum and the Portland Japanese Garden. Now, you've all received the full nomination packets with the entire nomination narratives for your consideration. And the next step in the process is for you to consider these nominees and select this year's awardee. And I'll turn it over to the chair to continue this process, and I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
Typically, there's this opportunity to just have a discussion on who you might support, or someone can make a motion on who they'd like to give the award to. Commissioner Bechtold is their hand raised.
I support discussion, but I wanted to throw it out there that I support Mr. Ed Washington receiving the award for his service on the UFC, also in the community. With my work team, I did the bumpy ride and we had the opportunity to meet Mr. Washington. He came to speak with us about Portland's history. And he's still giving today to the community and very active and engaged. And I think it would be a tremendous honor to give him the award for his service on the UFC.
Thank you, Commissioner Bechtold. Any other comments or thoughts from other commissioners on the nominees? Commissioner Clapp?
Yeah, thank you. I have to agree. Ed Washington's profile here, I think, is really pretty outstanding. And I do appreciate the other three people. I think they've had a huge impact, certainly in their neighborhoods, but also in the city. But it seems that well, something happened on my computer. It seems that in particular, Ed Washington has put in a lot of effort and it's really gone very far. So I think I would move more towards Ed Washington as well.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, I had another question. I was curious if one of these people have been nominated previously. Does anyone know that?
I can answer that question. To my knowledge, none of these people have been nominated previously.
Thank you, Nick.
I have a procedural question about nominees. If they're not selected, do they roll forward for consideration next year? Or is every application cycle a brand new cycle?
That's a great question. Every application cycle is a new cycle. Nominees are contacted if they do not receive the award. They are still contacted to inform them that of the honor of nomination.
Thank you.
Do we feel ready for a motion or more discussion?
I move to award Mr. Ed Washington the award.
Wait, do we have a second?
Yeah, I second.
All in favor of Ed Washington receiving the Bill NATO Award? Any opposed? Any abstention? That one? Okay, and Brian, we have the votes today to,
We're good,
great,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we're good. Thanks,
So
everyone.
moved. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks for helping me keep count. Wonderful. Thank you, Nick, for the presentation. And we are moving to run ahead of schedule.
Yeah, just letting other folks know they'll be on it sooner, but we do have Todd here for the next one, so he is ready to go.
Thanks for being here early.
My dad.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. We ready to get started?
Sure.
Let's do it.
All right. I'm Todd Lofgren, Deputy Director of Vibrant Community Support Services. And thanks for having me today to share an update on our sustainable future work and also the recent polling that we did. I'll try to zoom through these slides and then maybe we'll have some time to
No need
answer
to
questions.
rush.
Oh, good.
Take
All
your
right.
time.
All right, well, I'll go through the slides first and then we'll have plenty of time for conversation. I can
Great.
stay as long as you'd like. Let me try to share my screen here.
Have you replaced Sonia Smansky?
No, thanks for asking that question. I am really in a very similar role. I've been the Deputy Director of Portland Parks and Recreation, overseeing what we were calling our Operations and Strategies Division, which you can think about as like community engagement and volunteers and budget and accounting, those IT, all those kind of support services. With the new form of government, we've had a bit of a reorientation in the service area. So now we have the Office of Arts and Culture. We have the Portland Children's Levy and Portland Parks and Recreation all together in one service area called Vibrant Communities. I report to Sonia now instead of the Parks Director. However, all my direct reports are the same. My portfolio is the same. However, we're also supporting now the new Arts and Culture Office and the Portland Children's Levy. So that's
and what's Sonia's title?
So she's the Deputy City Administrator. So we have
Okay,
six Deputy City Administrators in 6 service areas now, that all of the offices and bureaus. And I think the logic behind that is one city administrator probably didn't want like 40 direct reports from all the offices and bureaus. So they needed to kind of align the management structure. So that's definitely a work in progress.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So again, thanks for having me today. Let's see if we can get this to work. Oh, there we go. Are you seeing, is this looking okay on your screen?
We're missing part of the slide.
It's like very small.
Yeah, we're getting kind of a square instead of a rectangle for some reason.
How's that?
Better.
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 Still.
Is it still small?
It's still a little small,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We're really having tech difficulties here today. Should I send this to you and then you share it? Is that going to be better for the people in the room?
I mean, I think we could probably make do in the meantime with this, but
Ryan, do you want me to send it to you or?
You can do that. I can share again. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm at Multnomah Arts Center today for big recreation training we're having. Sorry about that. It's coming your way, Brian.
All right, got it. Pull that up. Okay. Oh,
There we go. Perfect. We'll start there. All right. So as I mentioned, we'll do some context setting for anyone who's new to the sustainable future work, and then we'll go over the polling results. So we're going to go to the next slide. So the park system that Portland Parks and Recreation has today has historically been funded by Portland voters enacting bonds and levies. General fund has been an important part, but for sure not the only reason why we have the park system we have today. This slide shows how the system expanded over the decades. So you can see the acquisition of new parkland, Most recently, voters passed a 5-year operating levy in 2020, and voters also passed a $68 million bond measure in 2014, replacing a 1994 bond that was retiring. Go to the next slide. Voters have historically supported all the services within vibrant communities. This timeline shows the levies, bonds, and passage of the arts tax that provided funding for parks and recreation, support for the Portland Children's Levy, and arts in schools and grants for arts and cultural organizations. And the next slide. Under the leadership of Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Gonzalez, the Parks and Fire Bureaus conducted a poll together in November 2023. The poll indicated high satisfaction with park services, strong support for renewal of a parks levy, support for a parks bond, or a larger parks and fire combined bond. You can go to the next slide. Looking ahead for Parks and Recreation on the operations side, which is partially funded by Parks Levy, Parks has seen expenditures grow faster than revenues. For example, personnel expenditures have grown more than 10% per year the past 3 years, for a cumulative increase of 35.6% since the start of the current Parks Levy. Revenues, in contrast, have increased and are even forecasted to decrease slightly over the next 2 years as property values stabilize before they are forecasted again to increase. This means that for operational services generally at parks, we need to increase the parks levy rate for the next 5-year period or decrease service levels. But I want to note, especially for urban forestry, thanks to the Portland Clean Energy Fund, there's been a significant investment of new resources, so that won't necessarily hold true for our trees and our urban forestry division, but for much of the rest of parks, it will be true. For capital maintenance, we continue to see worsening asset condition and growth of the Bureau's capital maintenance backlog. Again, we're starting to make progress on our trees, on our green infrastructure, thanks to the Parks Levy doing proactive tree maintenance for the first time. The results of service impacts and closures of the community will be seen, especially in our kind of built infrastructure like community centers, or for instance, we had to close Columbia Pool due to deferred maintenance issues. The 2014 replacement bond has now been concluded and all of that capital funding has been expended. Our current assessment is that maybe 1 in 5 assets that you see in the park system, again, these are built assets calculation, not even our green assets, will fail or close over the next 15 years. You can go to the next slide. So we're currently projecting that the current 5-year parks levy will end its 5-year term with its funds fully spent. There was some media reporting kind of early in the parks levy saying there was underspending, and that's really just kind of scaling up the operations. So you can see on this slide, it's showing that we were underspent at the early years of the parks levy, but we'll be expending those resources through the end of the 5-year parks levy. Go to the next slide. Capital maintenance, actual expenditures historically are well below the target that any kind of system-wide national standard. And again, you'll see on this slide where we had kind of a peaking with the parks bond resources. Those now have been spent. And so there's kind of a growing gap of available resources and the need. You go to the next slide. So that's a bit about our funding position. So we'll jump into the polling. Go to the next slide. We conducted a poll with FM3, dual mode poll for likely May 2025 voters. The key findings, you can go to the next slide. Key findings from the survey are that vibrant communities levy with an increased rate can be viable in the May 2025 election. The addition of potentially even larger rate with the expiration of the arts tax is also a viable option, but slightly decreases support. You'll see here that voters are satisfied with park services and majorities see the need for more funding for parks and arts. Voter priorities continue to be funding parks, nature, trees, water quality, wildfire prevention, and free and low cost access to programming. Next slide. With a little information, both a parks levy with a higher rate and a parks and arts levy see more than 60% voter support, with support highest for parks alone at 64% compared to arts 61%. Go to the next slide. So before diving into the arts and parks kind of specifics part of the poll, survey recipients were asked a question to gauge how optimistic or pessimistic they're feeling about Portland currently. You can go to the next question. So this is a question that's been tracked and asked repeatedly since 2020. While a majority are still pessimistic, we're seeing a marked increase in the percentage of people feeling that Portland is on the right track. So this is definitely a notable shift. We'd like to go to the next slide. So 79% of Portland voters feel parks are very important to their quality of life. Go to the next slide. 77% of Portland voters are also reporting very high levels of satisfaction with services provided by Portland Parks and Recreation. Portland voters also visit parks. 70% reported they visited parks at least monthly. Portland voters visited arts and culture events less frequently, with 25% reporting attendance monthly or more. Next. 68% felt there was a need for greater park funding, and 58% found a greater need for arts funding. Likely due to its collection method, but also because I think Portlanders love arts and culture kind of experiences as well. Voters are very familiar with arts tax. So next we looked at voter support for potential ballot initiatives. Go next slide. Initially, the survey started with just the basic language that could be the caption or question in a ballot. Some of you might be familiar. It's very prescribed by the Secretary of State of like how these show up on a ballot. So that's what we test when we do these polls. So we did one for parks alone and one for parks and arts together. Next slide. With only that technical question, we see a majority, 54% of parks levy at $1.60 per assessed value and then a slightly lower for 45% support for the parks and arts combined measure. And just a reminder, we're at 80 cents per assessed value right now in our collection of the parks levy that was passed in November 2020. This was an open-ended question, and the measure supporters generally were supportive because they valued parks and nature. So we see this nationally. As many of you probably know, people really value clean water, nature, connection to nature and parks much higher than many other services. Go next. The measure, opponents of the measure generally were opposed to more taxes. That was their reasoning. Next. We then tested support for just a straight renewal at 80 cents, which is again the current levy rate, which if renewed at the same rate would mean some service cuts, again, because all of those inflationary pressures we've had since November 2020 to get through kind of, again, it would be almost a 10-year period. It would be a 10-year period. So we saw 55%. So you see coming up here, generally people would rather pay a little more and have more services in parks. Next slide. 55% support was lower when compared to the 70% in November 2023, when that question was asked without additional context that the same rate would mean service reductions. So we had kind of like just a clean ask, do you want to renew the parks levy? And people start with yes, but then once they learn like, oh, that would mean a cut in services, then they're less supportive, but still above 50%. Next slide. The support after a little bit of plain language information for parks alone rises to 64%, and for parks and arts together rises to 61%. This is consistent with what we've seen in prior polling. For example, the parks levy in 2020 passed at 64% voter support. But when we did the polling, we had an initial voter reaction of about 53%. So again, when people learn a little more information about what the parks levy would provide, there's higher support. We then provide a little more information about the potential measures. You go next slide. Plain language. Additional information provided to voters is shown here. This provided more description of what services the levy would provide. Go next slide. That information lifts support to 64% for the parks only measure, 61% for arts together. Go next slide. We then dug into the willingness to pay. Go next slide. We asked about the cost at the household impact. Slightly more voters indicated they were willing than unwilling to pay.
Oh, Todd, I'm sorry. Could you go back real quick? Is the $31, can you just explain what that represents?
Yeah, so we're basically trying to test whether people would be willing to pay more for the arts, and the $31 is the medium household monthly payment. So
Okay.
we're trying to compare whether $1.60 or $1.80 made difference on their willingness to support. We've generally found most Portland voters, when it comes to funding parks, they're generally supportive, and the kind of precise dollar amounts between these like $1.60 and $1.80 is really not very material. What's material, what we found in this, is that there's a little less support when you introduce arts to parks.
Thank you. That's helpful though, because I feel like sometimes it's hard to make sense of those numbers without the actual, what that translates to someone's budget. So. Thanks.
Right. So the medium household, you just take that times 12.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, we have very odd property tax in the state of Oregon. So yeah, it's very, very different for many people. All right. So given the choice, like I mentioned, plurality wants to increase the levy to avoid service cuts. So you can just see here, when people learn more information, well, no one likes to pay more taxes, and they like to renew things as they are. Once they learn that, oh, that might mean I actually get less service, people are more likely to want to pay a little more. Go next slide. So a majority would support an increase that replaces the arts tax. So again, there's viability here for arts and parks together, but again, not as strong as parks alone. Go to the next slide. So voters' top priorities for the measure include maintaining water quality, preventing wildfires, and that's maybe a connection where we have with Portland Fire and Rescue. So that was kind of what we were probing in November 2023, and protecting wildlife habitat. And of course, you can see the trees, where we have 73%, and those little arrows that are on the left of the text there, those are where it was a little higher than what we tested in November 2023. But generally, these are consistent what we've seen over time. Go next. Again, we kind of tested a lot of different things here, and you can see keeping things open, taking care of what we have, is always kind of higher. People love clean restrooms as well. Go next. And while there's kind of a lot of arts focused like conversations, I think in Portland, relatively speaking, when you compare them to other things that we have on this list, they are just lower. And in our consultations with other advisors like the Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Lands, and others, this is not unique to Portland, that when you stack up arts against nature and trees and clean water, it comes in lower generally. So again, there's viability for both. You can kind of see how it trends about the amount of information that folks are getting. So as they learn a little more what it costs and a little more detail, actually, and it's the later in the survey, people are kind of, there's a 20-minute survey that's happening. So like people are starting to get a little survey fatigue too. So the numbers start going down later in the survey sometimes. But these numbers are similar to what we've seen over time. Next. So again, these are the same summary of findings that I reviewed at the beginning of the presentation. We can pull those back up, or we can have a conversation. Happy to answer questions. And I guess maybe I'll just end on, this is really just an information gathering and sharing stage of where we are with Sustainable Future. There's no decision from the mayor's office or city minister Mike Jordan to pursue a May 2025 ballot at this point. And we're just in the stage of kind of sharing this information to see where the community and current and future council want to go with funding parks and arts.
I had a question. Has there been any discussion around different percentages for different values? So kind of like a more progressive way to collect this levy?
We haven't done much kind of like conversation or due diligence on the property tax idea, but we've definitely, there has been some kind of research on around the arts tax on that. So for instance, like every person, as you might know, that earns over $1,000 is supposed to pay $35 a year. And so like maybe increasing, you know, that floor amount, you know, 100, 200, 300% of, you know, poverty level within Portland, you know, to make it less regressive. But we haven't really done much on the property tax itself. Probably how you'd get there is trying to exempt certain types of properties or property owners, but we've never implemented anything like that. So one thing to keep in mind on all these is like administration costs for the scale that you're collecting. And yeah, so that's actually a little bit of an issue for the arts tax, that it's really, you know, it's collecting a relatively small amount, $12 million for as much kind of, it seems to be displeasure from people about how it's collected. So that's one thing to keep in mind as we brainstorm ideas, is like, go to scale on something if it's difficult to collect. Otherwise, maybe find another way.
Yeah.
For the current levy includes a fair amount of money for urban forestry operations. And I'm a little confused. Has some of that money been replaced by PSEF money? Or in other words, I'm wondering if there's a new levy put forth, if there is still the need for the funds for urban forestry like there were in the existing levy.
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't had those conversations yet, but I can give you the kind of general dynamics and scale. So what we've done with the parks levy is we reviewed all the different ways we expend funds on the operating side. And we have some things called like functional areas, about 150 of them, different ways we can track how dollars are spent. About half of those are parks levy eligible. And then basically what happens is the parks levy is blended into those eligible expenses to basically top up to provide enhanced increased service levels. And so what that looks like is that the general fund pays for about 2/3 of those eligible expenses, and the parks levy is paying about 1/3. So that's kind of urban forestry benefited from that. That's how we were able to pay for proactive tree maintenance or increased tree planting or just increasing staffing levels to do emergency response, all different ways that happened over the last few years. This last budget, the council passed basically a $7 million general fund, Portland Clean Energy Fund swap. And so we'll be taking some of those general funds that were coming in to urban forestry and basically just it's almost like an accounting exercise and swapping in Portland Clean Energy Fund resources. So it's not really changing the dynamic of how many parks levy resources are going into urban forestry. But your question's a good one, is like, I think urban forestry, round numbers, were about $140 million of new resources coming from Portland Clean Energy Fund trees over the next 5 years. But they're taking on new responsibilities too, like on private property trees or looking at the street tree maintenance and how we're gonna address that. So it's new resources, but it's new responsibilities as well. Brian or Casey, do you want to add anything to that?
I think just that, yeah, none of the funding from PSEF would be replacing functions paid for by the parks levy right now. So if the parks levy was reduced, it would result in a reduction in urban forestry services too.
Right.
The other comment I think I'll make, and I mean, it's Todd is well aware of this. I just don't see how parks can continue without addressing the need for funds for capital improvement. I don't know how the message needs to be communicated to either the state or local voters, but it's a disaster waiting to happen. And I understand why it's been put off and put off and put off for, I don't know, 50 years, however long it is, but it's just, things are gonna crash unless there's a solution. And I don't know where the leadership for that solution is gonna come from. And I don't have an answer. It's not tenable.
Well, from a technical park manager perspective, we agree that we are on a course to close facilities over the coming years. And capital maintenance and repair and replacement takes time too. So it's like turning a ship, if you will, right? This isn't, even if the resources are passed in the next year or two, it takes years to kind of turn it around. So we've been trying to educate folks about that since 2019. That's really both the operating and capital sides, so kind of two parts of our budget that need to be addressed through the sustainable future effort. And I think, as you've seen over time, it's really been levies and bonds. There's other ideas that we've investigated, but levies and bonds is really how Portlanders have paid for this over time. And maybe I'm just repeating things that folks know, but just how things get onto the ballot, either citizen initiated measures where people go out and put it on themselves by getting people to sign up, or the current council with 3 of 5 members, or the future council will be 7 of 12 members. need to refer something to about.
Yeah, I feel like it's a big challenge too, because we're facing that parallel issue with our schools where all these buildings were built a long time ago when they're all really needing to be updated or replaced at the same time, and it's tough because it's really expensive, but it's really necessary.
For sure. For like a sense of scale, the Portland Public Schools has a $2 per 1,000 assessed value levy. Ours was 80 cents. We passed, and Parks passed a $68 million bond in 2014. And since then, Portland Public Schools has passed over $2 billion worth of bonds to pay for schools. So, I mean, it doesn't take much to understand, like, we have an underinvestment in taking care of the infrastructure for sure.
Todd, I had a quick question. Was wildfire prevention, is that in the current levy language, or is that being added in this renewal just to be more explicit about using funds that way?
That's an eligible expense now.
Okay.
I think one thing we are probing and trying to, and this is just like very nascent conceptual discussions, is like right now, Portland Fire and Rescue doesn't really have the operational equipment, nor, while we do some training, we probably could be doing a lot more around urban wildfire hazard together. And that was kind of like, hey, let's see what likely voters might think about that. And then, you know, it wasn't a big surprise, it's high. Because there's a lot of people that live next to forested areas or at big trees, and it's a concern.
Yep, okay.
Happy to come back anytime you want us. Sarah Huggins normally would have been here. She's been leading our Sustainable Future effort. She's on my team, but she's in the other room giving a presentation to our Rex folks right now. So again, we don't really have immediate action right now. I'm sure we'll be doing briefing for the new 12 council members and the new mayor in November, December. And if anything were to be referred to the May 2025 ballot, it would need to be referred by the end of January. So it's a pretty short timeline. Otherwise, the next opportunity is November 2025.
And
Maybe
is there a difference? I know that turnout can be really different depending on what's on the ballot. Do you think that affects any likelihood on voting between like the May and the November ballots?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we kind of do this periodic polling, and that this polling, the polling results we just shared with you are for the May 2025 ballot, and we'd do it again if we were going to go in November. But generally, I mean, elections are changing all the time, but generally the larger the turnout in Portland, the better it is to pass measures like this.
Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for having us, or me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
See ya.
All right, well, that got us closer to our
Yeah, I think we're
time.
kind of back on track now.
So I guess we'll move to the PGE Harborton project. Oh, yes, Commissioner Bechtold.
For the record, I am an employee of Portland General Electric.
Thank you for stating that. All right, welcome to our guests. Thanks for coming to speak with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. Do you want us to just jump on in?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
for
we
it.
have a few slides to share, so I'm just going to share my screen. I should probably, on second thought, I've waited to share my screen until I asked our folks to introduce themselves. Maybe I'll stop sharing real quick and ask us and have us introduce ourselves first, and then so that you can actually see our faces. So I'm Laura Lehman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Environmental Planner at Parks and Recreation. Marshall, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, Marshall Johnson, Natural Resource Ecologist for Portland Parks West Side Natural Areas. And my portfolio includes Forest Park and Riverview Natural Area.
Hi, I can go next. My name is Rachel Felice. I use she, her pronouns. I work as the City Nature Manager for Portland Parks and Recreation. Jill?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Van Winkle. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the interim City Nature West Supervisor.
Thanks, folks, for introducing yourselves. Okay, now we can jump to the slides. So thanks so much for having us this morning. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you. And we're here to talk about the proposed PGE project in Forest Park, the Harborton Reliability Project. We have a pretty simple agenda. I'm going to kick us off with a high-level overview of the proposal, and then Marshall's going to get into some more details of the natural resource impacts that would occur in the park. And then I'll wrap us up with a look at the land use review process that is going to be ongoing. So just to start us off, this is just a vicinity map to show you where the project is proposed within the city. On this map, the green areas are properties or sites that are managed by PP&R. And then the proposed projects in the red oval, you can see it's in the north unit of Forest Park, just north of Linton. This is a slightly zoomed in view, and this map is something that was created by PGE and included in their land use application for the project. And it just shows the limits of disturbance for the project. On this one, I would note the Forest Park boundary isn't 100% accurate, but it's really useful for looking at the limits of disturbance for the project. So you can see that most of the disturbance area is within the park, near Highway 30, runs along the east side of Forest Park there. There's also some work outside of the park, across the highway, that's associated with the Harborton substation. And then that black line that goes to the west out to Skyline Boulevard is an access road that would be used for access for the project. We'll zoom in just a little farther still. Here's an image that shows an aerial view. It shows the relatively new Harborton substation, the substation, and the area of work that's within the park. I wanted to mention that on the information that PGE has provided for the project states that the Harborton Reliability Project is a 5-phase project. And the portion that we're talking about today is phase 3 of the larger project. So phase 1 was that new substation that was completed in 2020. Phase 2 consists of some transmission line upgrades associated with the substation. And then phases 4 and 5 are not defined yet to our knowledge. PP&R staff have asked for more information about those phases when that becomes available, but we haven't been able to learn anything more about those phases to date. So to start to get into more of the details of what's currently proposed, I have a couple more images before I pass it to Marshall. So this image shows the existing configuration of transmission lines in the park. So on this map, the dark black lines are existing PGE transmission lines. The light gray lines are existing BPA transmission lines. And then you can see the Harborton substation on the right side of the image. This is a simplified view of the proposed configuration, and I should have said both of these were provided by PGE as part of their land use application. So this shows the proposed configuration. And so this configuration includes about a 1,400-foot long new cleared corridor with new and reconfigured transmission lines within it. There's a pole labeled 2999. Let's see if I can point. So that's this one. Is labeled as replaced because it would be moved to a new location just south of where it currently sits and reconstructed there. The poles labeled 3 and 5, so this one and this one, are new poles with new lines connected to them. Those lines you can see here labeled Evergreen Harborton and Harborton St. Mary's. And then the towers labeled 2996 up here, 2997 here, and 2998 here are all existing lattice towers that would be reconfigured so that they could support new lines. And to create the new area of the transmission corridor, PGE is proposing to clear about 4.7 acres of forest in the park. So now I'm going to turn it over to Marshall, and he's going to get into some more details on the natural resource impact.
Okay, thanks, Laura. And I'm going to cue Laura to advance the slides as we go verbally. So this is the site plan that PGE submitted, one of the site plans showing an overview of the site in Forest Park, where they're proposing to expand the power lines. In this image, Highway 30 is along the right side there. And everything else you see here is in Forest Park, except for the blue area is a little bit more complicated. It's a mix of right-of-way and property owned by the federal government, where BPA currently has power lines that go through Forest Park in that area. But the pink area that you see here is where PGE is now proposing to clear forest and expand the power lines. That site area is in Forest Park. It's on land owned by the city. There's an easement on it that was sold to PGE several decades ago to use for the purpose of constructing power lines. The easement requires them to follow local, state, and federal laws when building power lines, which does include the City of Portland Land Use Code and also the Forest Park Natural Resource Management Plan. So also several decades ago, PGE built power lines through part of this easement area and left another part undeveloped. And that undeveloped area includes everything that's colored pink and green on this map. The undeveloped portion of the site is currently a steep, densely forested site with a stream running through the middle. Laura, if you could advance to the next slide. I just added these lines on myself just to give you a indication of what the proposal is. So the red lines in this image show where PGE is proposing to add new power lines. And there's 3 red dots where there would be new towers constructed. And then those dark lines are where they're proposing to create construction roads for the mostly for the heavy logging equipment that they would use to go in and clear the forest there. The proposal includes, as Laura mentioned, clearing about 4.5 acres. I think it's 4.7 acres of existing forest. That includes approximately 328 trees greater than 6-inch diameter at breast height. Quite a few of those are much larger than that. There's 2 oaks that are over 50-inch diameter. There are probably about 100 trees that are between 20 and 53-inch diameter. And let's see, let's go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to mention briefly, we're working with PG currently and planning and development on discussions around the mitigation proposal. Currently, in my opinion, it's not adequate to compensate for the impacts proposed. It includes planting approximately 900 seedlings, baby trees on the site where temporary disturbance is occurring and underneath the power lines. So it would require shorter stature trees like oaks and shrub and quite a few shrub plantings. So, or what's currently proposed. There are also some other components of the mitigation proposal that are under discussion, and we're still sorting that out. Okay, this map, this image that you're looking at now was submitted by PGE. It's part of the arborist report that was submitted, showing where trees would be removed. It's in the map's in 2 pieces, but what you see here are dots and numbers indicating where trees were surveyed. Each number specifies the species and the diameter of the tree surveyed. This is the lower portion of the site. And Laura, if you could advance 1 slide. This is the upper section of the site. As you can see, the red dots, sorry, I should have mentioned the red dots are ones proposed for removal. Blue are proposed to remain. And as you can see, there's a fairly extensive amount of tree removal proposed. And Like I mentioned, it's approximately 328 trees, many of which are likely over 100 years old. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial image that I made just to give you a clearer, crisper view of what the site looks like. The subject site is outlined in red here. You can see white dots that are the existing power line towers, and also the corridors that were cleared for the existing power lines. And then you can also see through the center of that area, the undeveloped forested area with the stream running through the middle of it. Next slide, please. So as far as resources, this site is completely within the city of Portland's environmental protection zone. As I'm sure you know, that's our highest level of natural resource protection in the city. This image is showing you the site outlined in yellow there. As documented in the Natural Resource Inventory that was adopted by City Council in 2022, you can see that this site in that yellow polygon is designated with the highest ranking for riparian habitat. It also has the highest rankings possible for several other designations, such as wildlife habitat. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like on the ground. It's a second growth mixed conifer deciduous forest, primarily composed of Doug fir, big leaf maple, western red cedar, and has additional lesser components of alder, grand fir, hemlock, and Pacific dogwood. I think there are a few yews on the site. Next slide, please. This is one example of a large cedar tree on the site that's proposed to be removed. Next slide. Just another example, visual example of a large multi-trunked big leaf maple, also proposed for removal. Next slide. And a large number of mature Doug fir that are on the list for removal. But I would point out, while we're looking at these, that the site's much more than just a collection of trees, large and small trees. It's actually a healthy forest ecosystem. It's well on its way, in my opinion, to achieving the goal of becoming an old growth forest, which is what it was set aside for when the city of Portland made it part of Forest Park. Currently, it has multiple canopy layers. It's got a diverse native plant community in the overstory, the midstory, and on the ground. It has streams and wetlands. There are large fallen and standing dead trees that provide excellent habitat for wildlife. There are layers of deep organic material over healthy forest soils throughout the site. Next slide, please. Understory vegetation, you can see here, has a diverse native shrub layer, including vine maple, salmonberry, thimbleberry, elderberry, and huckleberry. These are all common Forest Park understory plants. Next slide. In addition, you have things like red osier dogwood, sword ferns, bald hip rose, Oregon grape, and many others. Next slide. And another thing that is important here is you have a healthy ephemeral herbaceous type ground cover vegetation with things like trilliums and stream violets, inside out flower, western star flower. These are things that exist because it's a healthy forest through and through, and an indication of the sensitivity of the habitat that we have there. Next slide. Just a few other nice examples, because there are many. Pacific waterleaf, enchanter's nightshade, candy flower, fairy bells. Lots of our typical Forest Park herbaceous vegetation examples. A lot of these flowering plants also, I would note, support pollinators like bumblebees and provide fruit used by wildlife for food. Next slide, please. There's also the small stream that flows through the forest. It's a perennial stream, which is typical of Forest Park. It forks into two channels, and as it flows down to the bottom of the subject site, it goes down towards the Willamette River. Next slide, please. This type of high quality forest ecosystem, of course, naturally produces high quality wildlife habitat. These are all photographs I took on the subject site. There's a diversity of species, including deer, Douglas squirrels, red-legged frogs, bald eagles, pileated woodpeckers, and quite a few more. Next slide, please. So you can see they're examples of large mature trees with evidence of wildlife use. This cedar tree has been used extensively by pileated woodpeckers for foraging. This is a tree that's on the list for removal, proposed for removal. Next slide, please. And in addition to that forest habitat, there's also a significant amount of Oregon white oak habitat on this site along the lower section that would be impacted by the proposed project. This is an example of one of the large oak trees that would be removed by PGE, this one in particular to make room for construction access. This is the kind of thing that I would be working closely to hopefully avoid impacting by altering access through an alternatives analysis. Next slide, please. Another example is a large mature oak on the left side of this picture. I think its diameter, it was measured at 51, if I'm remembering correctly, inches. And if you use an age modifier, for example, just to give you an idea of 5 years per inch, that tree could potentially be 250 years old, something like that. This is one that would be removed in order to move that existing tower that you see in the picture there slightly to the south to address an issue with engineering the line to where it needs to go at the Harborton substation. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall. Appreciate that. I just have 2 more slides for you folks, and then we'll open it up for questions. So this one shows just a brief overview of the primary concerns that PP&R has from the review we've done of the plans to date. So one of our main concerns is climate resilience. We know we're concerned that the importance of protecting existing forested areas to achieving our citywide climate goals, including cooling and carbon sequestration, could get lost in the conversation about the importance of developing a clean grid. Our climate emergency work plan that was adopted by the city identifies both of those things as important actions to take to achieve our climate action goals. And PP&R believes that there shouldn't have to be a trade-off there, that we should be able to do both of these things. We're also concerned about the loss of wildlife habitat. Marshall already went over all of the important values here, and we don't have a lot of habitat like this in our system or in the area. We're concerned about impacts to water resources, especially to filled wetlands and potential impacts to the stream on the site. Well, I think Marshall also mentioned consistency with the natural resource management plan. I skipped wildfire risk. I'll come back to that. The natural resource management plan contains the approval criteria that the project has to meet in order to be approved by Portland Planning and Development, PP&D. So PP&R staff have been partnering with PP&D staff to provide comments about the completeness of the application. And so far, based on the materials that have been submitted to date, PP&R staff have indicated that the proposal as it stands does not meet the approval criteria in the NRMP. On increased wildfire risk, PGE does do a required annual wildfire risk reduction plan, but of course that doesn't completely eliminate risk. And the city's climate emergency work plan again identifies implementation of wildfire prevention actions as one of the key actions the city needs to take to achieve our climate resilience goals. And of course, we're all concerned about potential for a wildfire in Forest Park. And lastly, mitigation of impacts. Marshall mentioned there's a lot of ongoing discussion with PGE about potential mitigation actions they could complete as part of the process. But as of now, it appears to PP&R staff that the currently proposed mitigation isn't sufficient to address the impacts that would result from the project. So last slide gives an overview of the land use reviews run by Portland Planning and Development that PGE will need to complete in order to get approval to move the project forward. So it's a type 3 environmental review, type 3 conditional use, and a type 2 greenway review. The type 3 and type 2, most of you are probably familiar, but type 3 means that PP&D staff make a recommendation to a hearings officer, and that third-party hearings officer makes this final decision on the land use. Currently, the application is incomplete. So the process is a little bit on a pause right now as PGE gathers additional information to submit to PP&D to make their application complete. Once it becomes complete, the process will restart and move forward. And around that time, there will be a 20-day public notice prior to a hearing. The hearings before the hearings officer. The hearing will happen on Zoom, so there's an opportunity for folks to testify at the hearing and also to submit written testimony ahead of the hearing to the hearings office. And if the decision of the hearings officer is appealed or were to be appealed, it would be appealed to, that appeal would be heard by City Council. So to date, staff, we've heard from neighbors and from Forest Park Conservancy and some other partners that folks are concerned. And we do expect folks to get involved when the opportunity to testify comes up. And I also wanted to share that although it's ahead of the comment period, the PPNR board this week submitted a letter to City Council expressing concerns that they have about this project. That letter will be submitted again into the record when the public comment period is open, so that everyone's aware of that communication. But that is out there and available for folks. So that is the end of our slideshow. Thanks so much for listening. One other thing I wanted to mention before I stop is I will drop into the chat. PGE has they've been holding a series of public meetings where folks from the public can come and learn more about the project from them. And there's a couple more of those coming up in the coming weeks. So, and on that page, they have a website with the dates and the locations. And there's also some project fact sheet and some other information on their website. So I'll drop that link into the chat. But that's it. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you. I'm wondering if commissioners have any questions. Bruce?
So does the tree code apply at all to this situation?
Brian, do you want to? Oh, go ahead.
So I don't quite understand. They sold the easement. Does that mean? So I keep thinking of private residential property where if somebody wants to take out trees that are 20 inches or bigger, they pay a very large fee for each tree. And is that totally irrelevant to this issue?
I'm happy to chime in a little bit, Laura, if you want. This is Casey.
Go for it. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, maybe we can introduce the urban forestry folks who are also working on this project, and then Jolt, I'll leave it up to you who wants to answer that question about how the tree code relates. So Jolt, if you want to start with introducing yourself and then the tree inspector who's assigned to the project as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Zsolt Lehoczky and I'm an Urban Forestry Development Permitting Supervisor, and this is one of those projects that we are working on. And the tree inspector who is assigned to this project is Mariano Masolo, and who is also on this meeting.
And so Mariano and or Jolt, if one of the two of you want to talk about how the tree code applies to this project.
Mariano, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Mariano Masolo. Well, the tree, so the Title 11 tree code would apply in tree protection methodology and tree removal methodology, and we will also apply all the mitigation, which are kind of standard practice, depending on the size of the trees approved for removal. We're going to be a different amount of trees which needs to be replanted, or a payment a fee in lieu of planting if planting will not apply, will not happen on the site. And so those are standards. Title 11 practices in like happens in other projects.
Thanks,
We
Brian.
can I can also better explain how many trees and depending on the size. Basically, there are different breaking up by 6 inches up to 6 to 12 inches, 12 to 12 inches to 20 inches, and above 20 inches. It's going to be a kind of a discrepancy between our Title 11 numbers, let's say, and the ordinance 191-314. The ordinance related to Forest Park is a little, it's more, let's say, aggressive in terms of payment requirements based on the size of the trees.
So, okay, I'm just trying to, the 20 inches, if a tree is over 20 inches currently and you remove it, then it's $450 per diameter inch, I believe.
Correct.
So, so for every 20-inch tree, you're talking about $9,000. So if they are removing, say, 150 trees that are greater than 20 inches in diameter, then they're looking at, my math is not good, I can't do it off the top of my head, but probably somewhere $500,000 or something like that.
Well, more. So PG did provide an exact payment fee in lieu of planting, which was based on a count of trees, which is not really accurate, has been revised since the calculation, but it was in the round of a couple of millions. I can give you the exact number. I just have to retrieve the file, but yeah, they did provide the mitigation fee.
The trees that they're removing, is it because they're too tall and they are going to be near the wires, or it's because of the construction they need to get their vehicles in? How are they choosing what trees are removed? Because when I look at the map, you have trees that look like they're within 20 or 30 feet of one another, one saved and one goes.
Yeah, it's both. There are two trees needs to be removed because of construction and because of federal requirements in terms of clearance, depending of the the voltage, and so they need to provide at least 30 feet away from the wires and maintenance. So they basically, construction and clearance from the wires.
And is there any mention of taking trees out by helicopter to reduce soil compaction?
Yeah, we will discuss about that. They did provide the arborist report clearly. They did provide an arborist report with all the description about how the tree removal will happen. And of course, it's going to be more logging than tree removals, with a lot of damages to everything around the majestic trees in the park. And so definitely we will also discuss about that option, and definitely is the good one. I also suggested one that's an option. I don't know how it will work. Definitely the cost will be much higher, but that's probably the best option in terms of we want to avoid damages to the stream, to other small sized trees, and yeah, that's an option.
Brian, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I just want to clarify real quickly that the $450 per inch mitigation that Bruce mentioned, which is coming from the large tree amendment for trees 20 inches DBH or larger, that's specific to private property trees in private development situations. So that does not apply to this project right now, as these are city trees. So I just want to clarify. So the mitigation is different in the code for city trees. It's set by Title 11, and then it's sort of further revised by an administrative rule that the city forester issued a few years ago. So just want to clarify that the mitigation is different when it's private versus city.
Easement, what does that mean? The city sold the easement to PG.
I think if they were private property, that's more of a Mariano and Jill question, but if they were private property trees, then that provision of code with the $400 per inch would apply. But these are city trees, and I see a bunch of other hands raised, so there might be other people who can weigh in on that. I just want to clarify that for the purpose of the conversation here.
Marshall, I think you were next.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I just wanted to mention, I did, as part of a verbal discussion about alternatives, pose the question about reducing impacts during logging operations. And I suggested helicopters. And I think the answer I received was they looked into that option, but determined that it was too dangerous because of all the existing power lines in the area, that wouldn't be a feasible option. I think that's what I heard. And I just wanted to mention that in case that's helpful for the conversation.
Thanks. And then Laura?
Thank you. I just wanted to give a little bit of, add a little on the ordinance that Mariano mentioned. So that ordinance, I don't know if folks are all familiar, but it was adopted by council, I think, last summer. And it provides a potential and optional path for mitigation for Forest Park. And it borrows the methodology from the Title 11 methodology. So the fee structure is parallel to it's by tree size, and the fee amounts are parallel. And so that is something, like I said, it's an option. There's discussions happening with PGE about whether it's appropriate for this particular project, or whether different kinds of mitigation are more appropriate, but that's what that ordinance is. And it does follow the Title 11 mitigation payment methodology.
And can you say the number again? Because I didn't quite catch it for the ordinance.
Mariano, maybe I don't have it off the top of my head.
Sorry.
I'll drop it in the chat.
Thank you, Rachel.
It's 191314, ordinance 191314.
Thank you. Commissioner Clapp?
Thank you. I'm kind of hearing, so they already did a PGE, already did a phase 1 and phase 2 of a 5-phase project. So along with Bruce's question, if they already own the easement, is there any way that we could even say no to begin with? If they already have an easement that's able to have this, and I know we don't have the power to say no, but just, use the idea. And if they are already like 2 phases into a 5-phase project, is this like, are the wheels already moving here and there's no way that we could change the trajectory of this?
Laura?
Thank you. So on the easement, it's a legal agreement that gives them the right to do certain things within the park. It doesn't give them ownership of the property. So as Marshall mentioned, the easement does require PGE to comply with local land use well, I think more than just local, but to comply with land use regulations. So that is, the reason why they're going through the land use process with PP&T. Regarding the multiple phases, as part of this application, they provided an alternatives analysis that looked at a number of alternatives. And so I think PP&R would be in support of PGE taking a look at some of those other alternatives, a little more closely, and thinking about whether some of those could work, because that work phases 1 and 2 have really been focused on the Harborton substation area at the bottom of the hill. And so whether there's a way to avoid going through Forest Park in the future phases is a question that I think is outstanding for PP&R staff.
Okay, thanks, Laura. So I think one thing I just want to bring up in a larger sense is that this is it's a regressive, not regressive. It's not progressive in terms of what they're trying to do here. This is status quo, just 100%. It is not in any way looking forward. I'm not a homeowner. I share my rent with other people. I share my utilities. But my understanding is that all of the utilities for PGE and Pacific Power have gone up because they have to mitigate wildfire. Is that correct? Does anyone else know this for sure?
I can answer. I'm going to answer as the wildfire attorney for Portland General Electric and not as the commissioner.
Thanks, Taylor.
But it is public record at the Oregon Public Utility Commission and in our cost recovery documentation that yes, that is why the rates have gone up. We have had a lot of wildfire mitigation efforts that we've had to put in since September 2020 to build
Yeah.
resiliency into the grid. So yes, that is part of it, not all of it. There's some
Yeah.
upgrades like reconductoring like this project as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner Bechtold. So I think what I'm ultimately getting at is that this is not a forward-looking way that we need to be managing our utilities in the future. Right now, we are actively talking as a whole Western United States society to figure out how to deal with the issues of wildfire and climate change and how we're going to make a more secure grid. And then at the same time, we're just going to go through and do the same thing we've done for the last 100 years, literally go into a forest, cut it down and put high voltage high line wires through. It just doesn't seem like this is a forward looking project. And I think that with the amount of tree removal and impact, it just does not seem to me that this is something that we should even remotely get behind. And we should say, no, the alternative that we are paying for is putting them underground, is doing something, literally anything else that avoids all of the negative impacts that we're having right here. So it seems to me that this project is just, like I said, status quo, and that it's not actually moving anything forward while actually actively taking everything back. The one of the biggest heritage trees, an oak tree that we have here on Overlook Terrace, is 54 inches, and it was a subject of a huge battle between the developer and the city of Portland and local people around the tree. It's 54 inches, and they deemed that it was, in fact, well over 250 years old. It was here before the city of Portland was the city of Portland. So any of these other oak trees that are over 50 inches or so that you're talking about, they're of that ilk. So they're definitely these ancient trees that we have had for literally before the city existed. So it just seems foolish for us to not just say absolutely not, full stop, do something different. But that's just my opinion from hearing everything. And that's the final word.
I have a quick question that, Laura, this might be for you, but I know for transportation projects, there is a federal 4F clause about being able to go sort of above and beyond mitigation as it applies, within city codes and such. Is there anything like that for a utility type project?
To my knowledge, nothing like that applies to this project. Like I know we're doing the 4F project process for the interstate bridge replacement, but as far as I know, nothing like that applies here.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
I just have a quick question for Laura, because I worry that what I said earlier sounds like it was not entirely accurate because of this ordinance specific to Forest Park. So that ordinance does have specific mitigation payments required based on the size of the tree, and that those do kind of follow the private property levels that we have for Title 11. Is that right, Laura?
That is right.
Okay.
But one difference with the ordinance is I guess it's optional on both sides. So there's a discussion ongoing about whether it's appropriate for PGE to use that ordinance for this project. But yes, that is accurate.
That's great. Thank you, Laura.
This is for Marshall. What's the population of blackberry, English ivy, western trailing clematis in this particular plot of land that's proposed to be used?
It's minimal in the majority of that site. Most of the invasive weeds are around the borders where the power lines are. So a lot of the species are on the side, on the edges, not so much in the middle. There are some spots where there are blackberry and ivy within the site, but I would say the vast majority of it is fairly pristine native vegetation. It's the kind of thing that I could have my my staff go in and remove the invasives that are there on this 5 acres, for example, easily in a number of couple of treatments in a couple of days, and then there would be essentially nothing there.
That's great. So would it be appropriate, should this project go forth, that there be some sort of requirements in terms of managing invasives that come in? Because there'll be a great bit of disturbance, and often that's what welcomes these non-desirables.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, what we're talking about is clearing this forest and opening it up to be basically converting long-term into what most power line corridors look like in our area, which is, solid blackberry, Scotch broom weeds. And part of it's because trees aren't allowed to grow there because they're underneath the power lines. So you keep it in a state where those really aggressive basic power line corridor type invasives are going to persist, and they'll be there unless you go in and dump herbicide on it regularly, probably annually, to keep them out. So I don't even think that we would be able to do that. It would be a significant cost and effort, and it would add a lot of extra herbicide to the system that we would rather avoid.
So when I listened to some of the informational pieces that are available online, and the information that was presented by some of the PGE spokespeople was that the power that is going to be going through here, it's bringing quote, green energy from the north, that's hydro, green energy from the east, that's wind, green energy from the south, that's California solar, and that the power will be used primarily by St. John's and people in Northwest Portland. And I wondered, I'm not a PGE customer currently, have been in the past, but we're in a different district. But the reason they need more power is to serve the increasing electrical needs of those particular areas. And I was hopeful that PGE has an aggressive program to encourage, and the power is needed in the summer, not the winter. And so I was hopeful that PGE must have an aggressive program to encourage property owners in those areas to have solar panels. I don't know if that's the case, but I think the utilities seem to depend more on government sector support for that than encouraging it themselves. But it seems to me it's greenwashing. They're just saying this is for green energy. We need it, and it's for St. John's. It'll help St. John's, and it'll help Northwest Portland. And I think that's just, they're trying to get a certain message across. So it's frustrating.
Rachel, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention that in the information sheet that PGE has published that's on their website, it does say that the project is needed for grid improvements and to strengthen electrical transmissions capacity into Portland and throughout the service area. So it might indeed be larger areas than you described there. So if folks have questions, as Laura mentioned, PGE is doing some public information sessions. One's next week and one's a little bit later. I would encourage folks to ask those questions of the utility themselves.
Commissioner Bechtel?
I'm speaking on behalf of myself in my capacity as a PG employee, but I just wanted to say that I don't think it's fair to call it greenwashing. I think other comments are fair, but greenwashing means that it's not that it's a false claim of how the power was generated. So it does come from we actually have hydro facilities and wind facilities. Like our generation, it comes from our generation facilities and can be traced to those facilities. So it's not coming from like a gas plant, for example. So I do think it's not fair to call it greenwashing, because greenwashing implies that we're lying about the source of it to mislead the public.
Jolt?
Yes, I just wanted to comment or shed a little bit more light on Commissioner Cap's observation about tunneling or digging these lines underground. So while participating handful of these meetings and reading through some documentation, unfortunately, the trenching in this power line and Forest Hill would cause just as much or even more damage to the forest. They couldn't bury these lines underground without removing the trees first. So that is definitely an issue, and that's why that direction was not explored anymore. We do have similar situation with Kinder Morgan, and they have a gas line through Forest Park, and that line is underground. That they still need to access to the park. They still need to perform maintenance, and oftentimes this maintenance require tree removals because they actually need to dig up chunks or sections of the pipe and repair sections of the pipe. So burying it underground, although seems like a great solution, but unfortunately it's not something that is feasible. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Yeah, well, I guess I would appreciate, just based on my comments, if I would agree with what Laura has noted, that looking a bit further into alternatives would be proper, and really giving them a huge look in the sense that I think it should be assumed that this should not happen. And then that's the level of priority given to some of the alternatives. Like, what would be a sustainable thing that doesn't include putting power lines through a forest again, which has caused, literally billions of dollars of damage over the last several decades. So I know, or not decades, years, just a couple years. So yeah, I appreciate that for adding that context, but I think that we should strongly encourage that some alternative is found that doesn't cause near as much damage to this particular space.
Are there any plans for someone from PGE to come talk to the commission about this issue?
We haven't discussed that. I imagine that's something that we could do. Yeah, I think we could.
I'd be interested, because I know these are really difficult issues that lots of communities are facing, because we have we do need to ramp up green energy because climate change is also a huge threat to trees everywhere. But like I'm very struck by seeing those pictures of the understory and the streams, and we all know Forest Park closer in is like covered in ivy, and it's nothing like that. Like we don't have that kind of ecosystem in a lot of the parks. So it really feels like this is a special area that they've, unfortunately, that's also adjacent to this energy center. So just understanding kind of all of the dimensions of this, and then really, like how can we best advocate weighing those, issues.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know, Laura, as long as there's no potential issues there with, since there's a land use hearing planned, I don't know if there's any concerns there, but if it's appropriate for a PGE representative to come to the UFC, we could look into that.
That could be a good conversation to have with the folks at PP&D. I know with the Parks Board sending a letter directly to council ahead of the public comment period, we've had some questions about whether that could potentially be ex parte contact, but you just have to disclose ex parte contact. So they're just going to submit the letter at the time when the record opens. So that's a good question. We could definitely get in touch with those folks and look into that.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to briefly mention to Casey that Casey Clapp that PG did provide some alternatives, probably 6 or 7. Well, I did read those. I did read those. It seems to be pretty thoroughly, and it explain different options. Of course, I don't have the knowledge to have a discussion in detail about those alternatives, but they are, and apparently the one which they propose to carry out probably is the one with less impact.
Marshall, well, for anyone, protection of the stream, the proposed tree removals, are they away from the stream? How's that being dealt with in their proposal?
I can speak to that somewhat. So I will say they initially came to the city with the initial proposal through an early assistance meeting. It was in 2022, I think, in the spring. So it's been a couple of years. That initial proposal had significantly greater impacts. It included, I think, 2 or 3 additional new large tower constructions smack in the middle of the forested site, right, straddling the stream in some places. And the initial proposal was just to start by clearing the site so they could see what the ground was like, so they could start working on their design. So that was before we started having serious conversations with them about, okay, we know you have an easement, but you also have to comply with the Forest Park NRMP, which would not allow that kind of scenario. So in response to those initial meetings, they've done a significant amount of work reducing impacts or revising the design to reduce impacts. And it included removing one entire section of line and those towers that I just mentioned. And they've since moved the impact areas to sort of straddle either side of the stream to try their best to preserve that stream corridor. And they've done a pretty significant analysis of trees that needed to be removed to meet those standards that were mentioned earlier for safety of the new lines. So they've done quite a bit of work, and as a result, they've been able to make some great improvements on this plan. Unfortunately, from my perspective, it's still an appalling amount of impact that's being proposed to an area that's supposed to be protected by the people of the city of Portland, presumably voting to, support the Forest Park Natural Resource Management Plan and the criteria that would say if there's any way to build this so that it has less impact, either by doing it outside of the park or choosing methods and locations in the park that minimize the impacts, then that's what has to be done. I don't feel like the current proposal gets there because there's just still way too much impact. But to be fair, I will say they've done a great deal of work to try to reduce impacts, and I commend them for that. And I understand there's a need for this improvements to the system, and so there's a really tough decision that has to get made by somebody.
And I'm not familiar with the red-legged frog. Is that an endangered species or threatened, or is it just one of our?
It's considered a sensitive species for Oregon, I believe, is the classification. It's not threatened or endangered, but it's definitely on the list as one that's sensitive. It's in the I'm not going to get the words right. State Fish and Wildlife recognizes it as a sensitive species of concern.
And does this proposal, different times I've read about Forest Park, it's connects to the Coast Range. I mean, is this going to be a break in that, wildlife movement throughout Forest Park into the Coast Range and back? I mean, is this a barrier to that?
There's a certain level of increased barrier, disconnection of habitat corridors, certainly. But it's also has existing power line corridors on either side of it. So it's not as bad as it would be if it was just a brand new power line corridor being cut all by itself through an intact forest. So I guess the answer is sort of. Certainly the additional construction and the loss of habitat is going to disrupt species' ability to use the site and travel through the site. But to be fair, there's also existing power line corridors on either side.
I know it's 11:30, but I think Casey Jogers had a quick question.
Just a quick question is, in their alternatives analysis, did they provide an alternative where they did not go through the park?
Yes. Yeah, there's one along using a corridor along Marina Way, so that's staying on the other side of Highway 30 instead of coming through the park. And the alternatives analysis is fairly thorough, but I think I don't know that it provides as much detail as I would like it to justify that that's not a viable alternative. If you look at like a summary table, for example, justifies not going that way based on cost and the amount of time it would take. And I don't know that those are the right reasons to not further consider that alternative that would allow the line to stay out of Forest Park.
Thank you.
I know cost is gonna be a big concern because as a PGE customer, rates are going up a lot. So that is also one of the issues for sure, but I feel like we're gonna need more. We're gonna revisit this probably at some point.
Yeah, Laura, there's not a date yet for the land use hearing, right? Because the application isn't complete.
That's right. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be sure to let you know when we have any of that information.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all so much. And Marshall, I really appreciate your presentation because I feel like this is a part of the park that doesn't get used as much by Portlanders just because it's further out. So it's really like impactful to see those pictures that you have and just to understand that ecosystem a little bit more. So thank you for all your work on that.
Yeah, thank you for hearing us.
Absolutely. All right, well, I think we'll close this meeting. Thanks, commissioners, thanks, guests.
Thank you so
and
much.
Thanks,
yeah,
everyone.
we'll see you all next month.